Hey there, I'm Bill DeWeese, pro voiceover talent and voiceover career coach. Before we go a step further, please take just a moment and hit that subscribe button. And again, thank you for checking out the video. Thanks for subscribing and sharing with your friends. We want to let everybody in voiceover know the strategies and tips to help them to be a more successful voiceover talent and to have ultimately a profitable voiceover business and voiceover career. So today I want to talk about being a finalist for an audition or being put on hold for an audition. What does that mean? Well, first of all, before we get into the specifics of what it means, let me say congratulations. If you've had a hold put on or you're a finalist, that's a really good thing. And as I'm always encouraging the students in my voiceover blueprint, celebrate every single good thing that happens, because there's no doubt that building a business of any type, voiceover included, it's a lot of work. It can be hard. It can be discouraging, especially in a performance type of business like this, where we're constantly being judged through our work. And when the good things happen, you need to take a moment to give yourself a big pat on the back and say, attaboy or attagirl, way to go. And so let me celebrate with you. Congratulations. It's a big deal. It's a really good thing. Now, that being said, let me kind of jump to the other side of the coin real fast and say, don't get your hopes up too high yet, all right? So be affirmed in that somebody has recognized your ability, that you wouldn't be named a finalist if you weren't good at what you did or somebody didn't like what you did. So that's a really big deal. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you've won the job yet. Now, here's the caveat. If you're put on a hold, by the way, it's a little different thing than being made a finalist. When you have a hold put on you, if you're an actor or voice actor, that typically means 8 or 9 times out of 10 that the job is yours. They just need to have you hold a time and a date while they finalize everything that they need to finalize on their end. Okay, so a hold is finding a date and time on the calendar that you can hold and that they can hold, and they can count on you for that. But usually what happens, it's more along the format of saying you're a finalist. And also, let me say, that doesn't even happen most times. Most times you either hear nothing because you didn't win, or you heard something because you won. So don't expect that you'll be told every time that you are a finalist for a job. But what does that mean? When somebody reaches out to you and says, hey, you're a finalist for this particular job, what that means is that the client who posted that job has narrowed you down to probably the top 5 or 10 talent, generally speaking. Typically, a finalist doesn't mean 20, 30, 50 people. It usually means a small group. Sometimes I've been a finalist for with 2 people, me and one other person, or it could be 3 or 5, probably usually not over 10, although it could be, but most likely not, because the way this works is that you're auditioning for what would be your client, but they're working for their client. Your client would be the production person or company. Their client is the person who hired them to create the content or that production. So what typically happens is your client will finalize, get down to the last 10, 5, 3 voices that they like. They, in turn, will then present them to their client to make the job easier, so their client doesn't have to sift through 50, 100, 200, 500 auditions. And then they can make their final choice. So you may hear back, and it may go one of 2 ways. They say, congratulations, you're a finalist for this job. We'll be in touch shortly to let you know what happens. Or they may say, congratulations, you're a finalist for this job. We would love for you to read this script again. It's not uncommon to get a callback, essentially. If you're a finalist, you're in the top 3, 5, 10 people, to have everybody read one more time, and then they can present that final recording to their client. So that's kind of what it is, and that's the process of that. So being a finalist doesn't mean you got the job, but it probably means that you have somewhere between a 10 and 20% chance now of landing that final job. So even if you don't get that job, and if you look at the odds are always against us. I mean, it's a number. That's why you have to play big numbers, because if it takes, for instance, just hypothetically, it takes 30 auditions, 50 auditions to get one job, well, then you need to do 60, 100 auditions to get 2 jobs, and so on and so forth. I hope I did my math right. Math's never been my strong suit, but I think you get the idea that it is a numbers game, all right? So now what happens? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. What should you be doing? Nothing. You simply wait. My advice is this. I always tell my clients, I'm not my clients rather, but my students to hold on to everything loosely in voiceover, because if you become too attached to any outcome, you will undoubtedly get beat up emotionally, and it will make creating and building a voiceover business very difficult. So hold on to the outcome very, very loosely. What you don't want to do is to be needy and begin reaching out to the client and say, hey, have you heard yet? Have you heard yet? What's the status of this? What's going on with it? Your client, your prospective client, does not want to hear back from you unless they asked you for something. If they ask for another read, give them another read. If they ask for additional information like availability, give them that information, but never call them back or reach out to them with an email to ask what's going on. Keep this in mind. They don't owe you anything. That's the culture of voiceover. And if you expect it, and if you hassle them about it, then that makes you difficult to work with, which means you'll never get work from them. All right. So my advice is, while you're waiting, forget about it. Absolutely forget about it. In other words, if somebody comes to you 4 weeks later and says, hey, what happened with that job? Your response should be, what job? And it's like, oh, that job. Yeah, I've totally forgot about that. Now, I understand that's easier said than done, but unless you adapt that attitude, take that on, and begin to let go of outcomes, you will emotionally be in knots all the time, and you will get frustrated, and you'll find voiceover to be very difficult. So let it go. Now, when it comes to auditions generally, should you expect to hear back from the client? No. Have no expectation that you'll hear back from the client. And this is really kind of a continuation of what we were just talking about. The culture of voiceover is that it's very transactional. Clients put it out there, the auditions, you respond, and they get back to the winner. They typically don't notify or communicate with anyone else. If you lost the audition, they typically don't reach out and say, oh, sorry, you didn't get the job. Now, that being said, it does happen sometimes. I just received an email this past week from a client that said, because they had asked me they had reached out to me specifically asking me to audition, and I didn't get the job. And they very politely said, we appreciate your time, but our client decided to go with another voice for this project. And that's just the way it works. So don't expect to hear. If you hear, I always respond back and say, I appreciate the follow-up. Thanks so much. Again, the attitude that you want to take on is that you don't owe me anything, and I appreciate you taking the time to communicate with me. Okay, you've been putting the auditions out there, and not much, or maybe nothing at all, is happening, and you feel like, what a waste of my time and energy and maybe even talent. Why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep allowing myself to get beat up? Now, I want you to keep this in mind, and this may be one of the hardest attitudes to develop, but it will really serve you well, and that is this, that nothing is wasted. If you're doing the right things, and if you're working with a good coach, you should know what those right things are. But when you're auditioning, and you're not getting the jobs, and we've all been there before. It can take a while, and it can be hard, and sometimes it feels brutal. You begin to question your self-worth, your own ability. I don't care how good you are. It happens to everyone. And you feel like it's a waste. Why am I bothering? Nothing is a waste. And let me explain further. Every time you submit an audition, someone is hearing your voice. That's a really big deal. As a matter of fact, there could be many jobs on which you are not hired, but that the client is making a special note that they liked what you did, but they didn't think you were right for that project, so that they can come back to you later. I can't even count the number of times that I've auditioned for a job where somebody came back to me later and said, hey, will you audition for this job because they really liked my audition. I wasn't the right one for that particular job, or their client didn't like me the best for that job, but they felt that they could use me for something else. And so they'll ask me to audition for something else. Or they'll come back to me, literally, this has happened years later, and said, I just had this conversation a few weeks ago with a client. He said, you probably don't even remember this, but you read for me back in, I think it was 2017. And I've had it happen where it's actually even longer than that. And so you probably don't remember, but I've got this coming up, and I never forgot you, and I think you would be good for this. Now, does that happen most of the time? No, it doesn't happen most of the time, but it does happen. And when people like you, they don't necessarily reach out to you and say, hey, you didn't win, but I really liked your audition. It happens sometimes, occasionally. Most times it doesn't. But what I'm saying is, this activity you're putting out there where it feels like you're not getting any traction, you could be gaining way more traction than you could possibly imagine. So just always remind yourself that no effort is ever wasted. Okay, so what can you do to increase your win rate? In other words, the percentage of times that you win the job versus the number of times that you audition. How do you increase that? Well, I'm going to share some information I think that is probably contrary to what you've heard from most folks, but it has served me well. And when I began to follow this advice that I'm about to share with you, my win rate went up substantially. I began to win more auditions, and that is this. Number one, I disregard direction from the client. Whoa! When did you last hear that? Disregard direction from the client. Now, what I'm trying to say, let me give you the big picture. I'm not saying to don't pay attention to what's going on. You absolutely need to understand what's happening. You need to see the script. You need to understand the context of the script. But if you get caught up in the minutia of direction, because how many times have you received direction where they give you 25 conflicting adjectives on what they want you to sound like? Professional, yet relaxed. Upbeat, but somewhat laid back, and slow delivery, but faster in some. You start to get, your head begins to spin, you get confused, and you then begin to try to fit yourself into this idea of what you think they want, which means it's impossible to perform your best. So what I do, sometimes I'll glance at the direction just to get a sense. I want to know who the audience is. That's what I'm looking for. Who's the audience? And what's the context? Where are they hearing this? What do I want them to do? That's what I want to know. Then I disregard their direction. And I do what Bill DeWeese would do if I were in that scenario. In other words, if you were the person, if that was your voice, you're that character, how do you feel about it? How would you feel in that scenario? How would you communicate that to your audience? And if you can be true to who you are, I'm not saying you'll win every audition, but likely you will win more auditions because you will be A, authentic, and B, you will be believable. Because when you're trying to fit yourself into somebody else's mold and trying to sound like what you think they should sound like, you don't sound believable. It sounds contrived and pushed and difficult. And if you feel that way, it makes your audience feel, it makes it hard for them to listen to you because they can feel the tension there. So you have to it has to come from your DNA. It has to come from your point of view, from your personality. How do you feel about it? And if you're true to that, you will win more auditions. And then another little quick tip is always do at least 2 takes. Clients tend to think of reads as being either high energy or low energy in terms of the feedback that they give. Now, beyond that, I'm sure there's a lot more that goes into that they could not even, I'm sure they would have to think through to know exactly what they're trying to communicate. That's just, it comes out simply as upbeat or low energy. So higher energy, lower energy. So what I try to do is give 2 auditions, one where it's a little more up-tempo, a little more excited, where I'm a little more into it in that way. The other where I'm laid back. Not that I'm not into it, but I don't hold to it. I don't squeeze it so tightly. I just share it in a little more relaxed, not totally aloof, but not as intense. I'm not in their face. The first read, I might be a little more in their face. The second, it's a little more laid back, where I'm just kind of inviting them to listen to the information that I have to share with them. And by doing that, you also can dramatically increase your odds of winning an audition. My final thought is this. Auditioning is a process. It's a numbers game. Don't put too much emphasis, base too much of who you are on any one audition that you do. If you do, you will undoubtedly become frustrated. It will make it difficult to work. It'll become difficult to not only audition, but to do good auditions because you're always thinking about the last 1, 2, 10, 30, 100 auditions that you've done where you didn't win the job. So you have to hold loosely to all of this. And remember, it is a numbers game. Doesn't mean you're not good. Doesn't mean there are not jobs out there for you. It just means that you need, to use a baseball analogy, you need another at-bat. you've got to keep swinging because what you need are base hits. And base hits aren't made every time you go to, for those of you who have played baseball, you know how this works. In Major League Baseball, a most valuable player might bat 300 or so. That's 3 times out of 10. Now, in voiceover, you can have a much lower batting average than that and still be a superstar in voiceover because it's just a numbers game. So you've got to get at bat as many times as you can. And remember, all of those at-bats, all of those activities are building a foundation of awareness in the marketplace that you don't even know about. So just keep that in mind, stay motivated, keep swinging, keep these tips in mind, maybe make a few notes, put them up in your studio or bookmark this video so you can come back and review it just to keep you motivated and to make sure that you're using the strategies that will give you the best opportunity to win auditions. Thanks for checking out the video. If you look below in the description, you'll see a lot of resources that I think that you will find helpful in building your voiceover career. And I look forward to talking to you again soon with more information to help you build a profitable voiceover business.